Hey, I'm Lexi, and this is what you should know. Born or created? That is always the question in true crime podcasts. For this case, I honestly feel confident in saying that I believe this monster was created. Which monster? I hear you ask as you double check the title of the episode. I told you last time, I am a supernatural being. And no, I will never ever actually take myself seriously. Well, you're about to find out who I'm talking about. Strap in and make sure you have an empty stomach because this is what you should know about Katherine Knight. Starting in a conservative rural town of Aberdeen, New South Wales, Hunter Valley, Barbara Rohan, a married woman, was forced to move to Moree after beginning a relationship with the co-worker of her husband, Ken Knight. Two of Barbara's four children stayed with their father, while the two youngest were sent to live with an aunt in Sydney. After this move, Barbara and Ken started a life together, and on the 24th of October 1955, they gave birth to twins Joy and Catherine. Barbara's ex-husband, Jack, died in 1959, and the two children who had lived with him moved in with the Knight family. Apart from her twin, the only person Catherine was close to was her uncle Oscar, who was a champion horseman. But in 1969 he committed suicide, leaving Catherine completely devastated, but she then claimed that his ghost came to visit her. The Knight family eventually moved back to Aberdeen, and Ken spiraled into alcoholism. It was in that spiral that he started openly using violence and intimidation to rape Barbara up to 10 times a day. Unfortunately, Barbara lacked the support to leave, or the healthy coping mechanisms that would have been required, and in turn often told her daughters of intimate details of her sex life and how much she hated sex and men. Unfortunately, this really was not the worst of it. Later, Catherine claimed to be frequently sexually abused by several members of her family, which continued until she was 11. And when she was older, when she complained to her mother that one of her partners wanted her to take part in a sexual act that she did not want to do, Barbara told her, "Put up with it and stop complaining." Suffice to say, this kind of environment was enough to twist anyone's mind. By all accounts, Catherine was a pleasant girl who struggled to regulate her emotions and would experience uncontrollable murderous rages in response to minor upsets. During her time in high school, she became a loner and is remembered by her classmates as a vicious bully who would stand over smaller children. There is even a reported incident where she assaulted a boy at school with a weapon, and due to her outbursts, was once injured by a teacher who was acting in self-defense. By contrast, when she wasn't in a rage, she was a model student and often earned awards for her good behavior. But her school career ended at the young age of 15, and without having learned to read or write, she gained employment as a cutter in a clothing factory. 12 months into this position, Catherine left to start what she referred to as her dream job, cutting up meat in the local butcher, from where she was quickly promoted to boning and given her own set of knives. At home she hung the knives over her bed so that they, and I quote, "would always be handy if I needed them." A habit she continued until her incarceration, everywhere she lived. Catherine's first notable relationship was with David Kellett, whom she met in 1973. They worked together, and during their relationship, she would completely dominate him. If David got into a fight at the hotel, she would step in and back him up with her fists without fail. In a strange, kind of bogan way, she sounded kind of ride or die, but this is really not a good thing, as her violence would be the answer to any situation that would upset her. In 1974, Catherine and David married at her request, with the couple arriving at the service on her motorcycle, with a very intoxicated David on the passenger seat. As soon as they arrived, Barbara, Catherine's mother, gave him some advice. Verbatim for what he said about it was, "The old girl said to me to watch out. You better watch this one, or she'll fucking kill you. Stir her up the wrong way, or do the wrong thing and you're fucked. Don't even think about playing up on her. She'll fucking kill you." And that was her mother talking. She told me she's got something loose. She's got a screw loose somewhere. On their wedding night, Catherine tried to strangle him. She explained it was because he fell asleep after only having intercourse 3 times. Now, I consider myself to have a healthy drive that is relatively high, but 3 times in one night is plenty and does not warrant strangulation for failing to go for a 4th. If they say no, even at the first round, respect that. Body autonomy is a thing, yo. It goes in every direction. Like, be salty about it if you feel the need to be, but perhaps slow your roll and don't try to strangle your new spouse. This marriage was quite violent, and on one occasion, a heavily pregnant Catherine burned all of David's clothing and shoes before hitting him across the back of the head with a frying pan, simply because he had arrived home late from a darts competition after making the finals. Fearing for his life, David fled before collapsing in a neighbor's house and was later treated for a badly fractured skull. Police wanted to charge her, but Catherine managed to manipulate David into dropping the charges. In May of 1976, shortly before the birth of their first child, Melissa Ann, David left her for another woman and moved to Queensland. He stated he was unable to cope with her possessive, violent behavior any longer. The day after David left, Catherine was seen pushing her new baby in a pram down the street, violently throwing the pram from side to side. Understandably, people were concerned for the welfare of the baby, and this led to Catherine being admitted to St Elmo's Hospital in Tamworth, where she was diagnosed with postnatal depression and spent several weeks recovering. However, she was released too soon, because after being released, she placed her 2-month-old daughter on the railway line shortly before the train was due, then stole an axe, went into town, and threatened to kill several people. Thankfully, a man in the district known as Old Ted, who was foraging near the railway line, found and rescued Melissa only minutes before the train passed. Catherine was then arrested and taken again to St Elmo's Hospital, but apparently recovered and signed herself out the following day. This greatly concerns me, as I have said in so many episodes, they have a pattern of behavior. More should have been done, especially since a few days after, Catherine slashed the face of a woman with one of her knives and demanded she drive her to Queensland to find her estranged husband, David. The woman escaped after they stopped at a service station, but by the time police had arrived, Catherine had taken a little boy hostage and was threatening him with a knife. She was disarmed when police attacked her with brooms, and she was admitted to the Morisset Psychiatric Hospital. I feel at this point she should have been kept for as long as possible, especially since Catherine told the nurses she had intended to kill the mechanic at the service station because he had repaired David's car, which allowed him to leave, and then kill her husband and his mother when she arrived in Queensland. When police informed David of the incident, he left his girlfriend and moved back to Aberdeen with his mother to support Catherine. I am not sure if they really went back for her or more for Melissa Ann, but Catherine was released on the 9th of August, 1976. They now moved to Woodridge, a suburb of Brisbane, where she obtained a job at the Dinmore Meatworks in nearby Ipswich. Things appeared to improve, as on the 6th of March 1980 they had another daughter, Natasha Marie. But it wasn't a permanent improvement, as in 1984, Catherine left David and moved in, first with her parents in Aberdeen, and then to a rented house nearby Muswell Brook. While she returned to work at the abattoir, she injured her back the following year and went on a disability pension. No longer needing to rent accommodation close to her work, the government gave her a housing commission house in Aberdeen. Catherine then met 38-year-old miner David Saunders in 1986. A few months into dating, he moved in with her and her 2 daughters, although he kept his own apartment in Scone. I personally feel trying to move in with someone that quickly really is a huge red flag. If someone you just started dating is trying to get you both to move in together that quickly, maybe take just a quick step back. And personal opinion, double red flag for the other person to keep their original apartment. It's just a bit weird to me, that's all. With that, Catherine became jealous regarding what he did when she was not around and would often throw him out. He would then move back into his apartment in Scone, and then she would follow him and beg him to return to her. But this would only continue the escalating cycle of abuse, and in May 1987, she cut the throat of his 2-month-old dingo pup in front of him, for no more reason than as an example of what would happen if he ever cheated on her, before going on to knock him unconscious with a frying pan. David stayed with her, and in June of 1988, Catherine gave birth to a 3rd daughter, Sarah, which prompted David to put a deposit on a house, which Catherine paid off with her workers' compensation for a back injury, which came through in 1989. Catherine then proceeded to decorate the house with her feminine touch. And from what I've already told you of her, you can already picture the animal skins, skulls, rusty animal traps, leather jackets, old boots, machetes, rakes, and pitchforks. No space, including the ceilings, was left uncovered. Obviously, she was a fan of rural maximalism. One night, an argument broke out where she hit David in the face with an iron before stabbing him in the stomach with a pair of scissors. David moved back to Scone, but when he later returned home, he found she had cut up all of his clothing. David Saunders had finally had enough and, fearing for his safety, took his long service leave and went into hiding. Katherine tried to find him, but no one admitted to knowing his whereabouts. Several months later, he returned to see his daughter, only to find Katherine had gone to the police and told them she was afraid of him, allegedly claiming that violence was mostly on his side. They issued her with an AVO against him, which is also known as an apprehended violence order. Now, to go into what an AVO is, for those of you who may not know, I will quote the New South Wales Legal Aid site. An AVO is an apprehended violence order. It is an order to protect all victims of domestic violence when they are fearful of future violence or threats to their safety. They are sometimes called restraining orders or protection orders. There are two types of AVOs: apprehended domestic violence order, an ADVO. This is when the people involved are related or have had domestic or intimate relationship. Women's domestic violence court advocacy services are funded to assist women in ADVO matters. Apprehended personal violence order, so an APVO. This is made where people involved are not related or do not have domestic or intimate relationships. For example, they are neighbors, or where the person is being stalked or intimidated by someone. An AVO is not a criminal charge. It is an order for your future protection. An AVO sets out restrictions on the person's behavior so that you can feel safe. If you have children, the order will also protect them. The next man in Katherine's life was the luckiest man of them all, ex-co-worker, 43-year-old John Chillingworth. I'm just gonna call it. He actually has an awesome last name. In 1990, he impregnated Katherine, who birthed a son they named Eric. The relationship only lasted 3 years before she left him for a man she had been having an affair with for some time, John Price. John was the father of 3 children when he met Katherine. Those who knew him said he was a terrific bloke and was honestly liked by everyone who knew him. His first marriage had ended in 1988. While his 2-year-old daughter had remained with his former wife, the 2 older children lived with him. John was well aware of Katherine's violent reputation, and she moved into his home in 1995. His children liked her, and he was making a lot of money while working in the local mines. And apart from violent arguments, at first, and I quote, life was a bunch of roses. I feel as though having to say, apart from violent arguments, really makes the bunch of roses an oxymoron. If it is one hill I will die on, it is if you have to say your relationships are great aside from the abuse. Please find a way to leave. Reach out for help. Your life is worth way more than what they make you believe it is. In 1998, Katherine instigated a fight over the fact that John did not want to marry her, and in retaliation, she videotaped items he had stolen from work and sent the tape to his boss. These items were out-of-date medical kits that he had scavenged from the company rubbish, so things that were not going to be used anyway. Unfortunately, rules are rules, and John was fired from his job that he had held for nearly 17 years. That same day, he ended the relationship with Katherine and kicked her out. She returned to her own home, while news of what she had done spread throughout the town. It was only a few months later that John returned to Katherine and restarted the relationship. However, he now refused to allow her to live with him. Unfortunately, this decision led to the relationship becoming more volatile. The fighting became even more frequent than previously, and most of his friends distanced themselves, not wanting to have anything to do with him while he and Katherine remained together. And that's fair. As horrible as that sounds, it's fair. You don't have to be a part of someone else's abusive relationship. In the year 2000, Katherine continued to abuse John, with it reaching a violent peak as she stabbed him in the chest. Finally having enough, he kicked her out of his house, and on the 29th of February, he stopped at the Scone Magistrates Court on his way to work and took out a restraining order to keep her away from both him and his children. That afternoon, John solemnly told his co-workers that if he did not come to work the next day, it would be because Katherine had finally killed him. Fearing for his safety, they pleaded with him not to go home, but he told them that he believed she would kill his children if he didn't. I'm unsure if it's something he could have done, or if perhaps it didn't even occur to him at the time. But if you find yourself in that situation, reach out to the police. I have never had a situation where I've called the police over something that turned out to be a big old case of nothing, where they then told me that I shouldn't have called them. They prefer you to be overly cautious if you have any reason to. For a palate cleanser, if you make it to the end, I will tell you a funny story of when I actually called the cops. It was a moment, which I still find funny to this day. That day after work, John arrived home to find that Catherine, although not there herself, had sent the children away for a sleepover at a friend's house. He then proceeded to spend the evening at his neighbor's house before going to bed at 11 p.m. Earlier that day, Catherine had gone out and bought new black lingerie and had videotaped all of her children while making comments which have since been interpreted as a crude will. Like the terrifying psycho that Catherine is, she later arrived at John's house while he was sleeping, watched TV for a few minutes before having a shower. She then woke John and they had sex, after which he fell asleep. At 6 a.m. the next morning, the neighbor became concerned that John's car was still in the driveway, and when he failed to arrive at work, his employer sent a co-worker to see what was wrong. Both the neighbor and the co-worker tried knocking on John's bedroom window to wake him, but after noticing blood on the front door, they alerted the police, who arrived at 8 a.m. This is where I'm going to warn. This is where the episode is going to get relatively graphic, because believe it or not, even what she had done previously, it gets worse. Officer Matthews and Officer Furlonger first knocked on the front door. However, the same as it was for the neighbor and co-worker, it went unanswered. With concern growing, the officers went around the side of the house and broke in through the back door. I feel what happened next can only be described by Officer Matthews, who was quoted as saying, "There was something hanging, blocking my entry. I thought it looked like some kind of blanket. I used my left hand to push it aside, and I remember feeling coldness. I looked down and my left arm was covered in blood. I couldn't understand why my arm was bleeding." He then came to the conclusion that he must have cut himself, forcing entry into the house. But this was not the case at all. The blood on his left arm, horrifyingly, had came from what can only be described as the pelt of John Price. It wasn't fabric hanging from the ceiling. What was attached to a meat hook, swinging from side to side across the entryway into the corridor, was John Price's skin, without head or genitalia. John's skinless corpse had been sat in a single-seater armchair with his left arm draped over an empty 1.5-liter soft drink bottle with his legs crossed. Through the blood evidence and autopsy, it was found that Catherine stabbed John with a butcher's knife while he was sleeping. He awoke and tried to turn the light on before attempting to escape while Catherine chased him through the house. He managed to open the front door and get outside, but either stumbled back inside or was dragged back into the hallway, where he finally died after bleeding out. He had been stabbed 37 times, both in the front and back of his body. Many of these stab wounds extended into vital organs. Catherine had then skinned him, with precision someone can only learn from working in an abattoir for many years. Catherine then decapitated him and placed his head into a pot and boiled it. The officers on the scene found his head still in the pot, and the pot was still warm. John's buttocks had been cut from his body and cooked in the oven, served up then with baked potato, pumpkin, zucchini, cabbage, yellow squash, and gravy in 2 settings at the dinner table, along with notes beside each plate, each having the name of one of John's children on it. She was preparing to serve his body parts to his children. A third meal was thrown out on the back lawn for unknown reasons. Theories as to why range from it being thrown out for the dogs to eat, all the way to the fact that Catherine had attempted to eat it but could not. She had also left a handwritten note on top of a photograph of John, and the note read, "Time got you back, Jonathan, for raping my daughter. To you, Beck, for Ross, for little John. Now play with little John's dick, John Price." It appeared that with this poorly written note, Catherine was trying to make it seem as though John was a monster, a theme she followed during the trial. Now through all of this, you are likely wondering the same as anyone else who briefly looked away from a spider, only to find it gone. Where the fuck did she go? Catherine was found comatose after taking a large number of pills. Later, police were able to prove that directly after John's murder, Catherine went into Aberdeen and withdrew $1,000 from his account. What was done with that money, no one is sure. Catherine was charged with the murder of John Price, to which she entered a plea of not guilty. Her trial was initially fixed for the 23rd of July 2001, but was adjourned due to her counsel's illness, and it was then set for the 15th of October 2001. At the start of the trial, Justice Barry O'Keefe offered 60 jury prospects the option of being excused without question due to the graphic nature of the photographic evidence. 5 jury members accepted. When the witness list was read out to the prospect, several more also dropped out. Catherine's attorneys then spoke to the judge, who adjourned to the following day. The next morning, she changed her plea to guilty, and the jury was dismissed. Justice O'Keefe had been advised of the plea change the day before, and had adjourned the trial to order a psychiatric assessment overnight to determine whether or not she understood the consequences of a guilty plea and was fit to make such a plea. Catherine's legal team had planned to defend her by claiming amnesia and disassociation. No reason has ever been given for the guilty plea, and despite giving it, she still refuses to accept responsibility for her actions. During the sentencing hearing, the defense team requested that Katherine be excused to avoid hearing some of the facts, but the application was refused. However, when Dr. Timothy Lyons took the stand and described the skinning and decapitation, Katherine became so hysterical she had to be sedated. Many believe that her hysteria from hearing the facts was just an act. On the 8th of November, Justice O'Keefe pointed out that the nature of the crime and Katherine's lack of remorse required a severe penalty, and was quoted as saying in court, "An examination of the cases referred by counsel supports the view that I have formed, namely that the only appropriate penalty for the prisoner is life imprisonment, and that parole should never be considered for her. The prisoner should never be released. Katherine Mary Knight, you have pleaded guilty, and have been convicted of the murder of John Charles Thomas Price at Aberdeen, in the state of New South Wales, on or about the 29th of February 2000. In respect to that crime, I sentence you to imprisonment for life." In June of 2006, she appealed her life sentence, claiming that a penalty of life without parole was too severe for the crime. Justices Peter McClellan, Michael Adams, and Megan Latham dismissed the appeal in New South Wales Court of Criminal Appeal in September, with Justice McClellan writing in his judgment, "This was an appalling crime, almost beyond contemplation in a civilized society." And on that reassuring note, that is all I have for you this week. As always, I'll be posting pictures relevant to the case on Instagram and Facebook at What You Should Know Australia. I do warn, you can find some crime scene pictures online, but honestly, if you ever intend to enjoy stew ever again, do not. I know I'll be eating vegetarian for at least a week after this one. If you have any case requests, or if you have any Australian ghost or crime encounter stories, please send them through to my email of whatyoushouldknowaustralia@gmail.com. Also, in other news, I have now created a Twitter. I don't necessarily understand Twitter, but I've created one, @WhiskerPod. And now, as I have promised, this is the story of the time that I called the cops for a big old case of nothing. So, I was home alone, and I heard what sounded like someone breaking into the house. I initially went to go check it out, until I heard a voice say, "Go get her." Panicking, I logged myself in the bedroom. Thankfully, the bedroom did have a lock, and I called 000, which is the Australian emergency number. The police came. I had to find a way to get from my bedroom to the front door with the hope of not getting murdered. They had brought out the canine unit. The big guns were out. They were checking everything out. As they were checking through the house, they couldn't find anything that would suggest anyone broke in. And then, as they opened the toilet door to check in there, they found a poster I had hanging on the wall had fallen down. And that's what I heard in regards to someone breaking in. As for the voice saying, "Go get her," I lived in a weird apartment that had really strange acoustics. And those strange acoustics meant that I heard someone on the street saying, "Go get her," as in, "Go get our friend, we've got to get going." But because I was already freaking out, yeah, I called 000. The police were really good about it too, though. They told me that they were glad I called, better safe than sorry. But oh boy, I still find it so funny, but so embarrassing. But that's all I have for you. Until next week, my lovelies, stay safe and stay hydrated. Bye!